Newsfirst, NEWSLINE with Faraz Shauketaly.
And very good evening to you. This is NEWSLINE and we're broadcasting live from the Newsfirst studios in Dawson Street in Colombo. And NEWSLINE starts off this evening with some breaking news. Breaking news is that the National Election Commission has announced this evening that the notice calling for nominations of 340 local government institutions will be released by the district secretaries tomorrow, Wednesday the 4th. A senior official at the Elections Commission said that nominations will be accepted 2 weeks after the notice is published. The notice will include the date of accepting nominations, location, bonds, candidates, female representation, and other matters. So the breaking news is that the National Elections Commission has announced this evening that the notice calling for nominations for 340 local government institutions will be released by the district secretaries tomorrow, Wednesday the 4th. And our guest this evening on NEWSLINE Live is the chair of the Advocacy and Board Director at the CFA Society of Sri Lanka, Mr. Ravi Abesurya. Very good evening to you, Mr. Abesurya, and welcome to the program.
Good evening, Faraz.
Thank you very much for being here. Sri Lanka needs system change. We've just heard the announcement that the local government elections, that notice will be put out tomorrow. But how badly does Sri Lanka need elections?
I believe elections are absolutely required. There is no question about it. People are waiting to, bring about a change, and I would have expected the elections should have happened even earlier. The only issue that is being told is that we don't have the money. I don't know, maybe 10 billion rupees or whatever. That's the excuse that is being given. So that excuse can be forever postponing elections. But I think it is absolutely required.
But if we cast our minds back to a few months, a year ago, a little bit more than that even. But do you remember that time? It seems such a long time ago that people may have even forgotten. But do you remember the time we all had to wear masks? We couldn't, we had to keep a 1 meter distance away. My late chairman, Mr. Rajendran Rajamahendran, had to invest a bit more money than he had already done and create a temporary studio down in the car park so that we wouldn't bring the germs upstairs into the room and so on. And in between all that, when the politicians decided that they must have elections, lo and behold, we were forced into an election mode. We did things like, couldn't use the pens, so we had to use pencils. And we stood a meter away and we diligently and duly stood in the queue. That was all right. And this was in between a global pandemic. And now, to use this excuse that there's no money in the light of the garlic scam, the sugar scam, and all these fancy projects, and all the commissions that are paid out for the importation of fuel and coal and all that, and these departures from due processes, it's a bit much to think that the people can be bought over by this hocus-pocus nonsense that there is no money. They'll have to just print a bit more. But why is it important?
It is because the current president doesn't have the mandate or legitimacy, as well as you need to bring confidence to the international community, particularly the multilateral lending agencies, IMF, as well as ADB, World Bank.
And actually the IMF have said that they must have a mandate.
Exactly.
That they don't want to be dealing with people without a mandate.
That's right. So to implement their conditions, they are very strict conditions now.
Yeah.
You can't have a very uncertain, or I would say volatile political climate to implement them. They have to be implemented over a number of years. We are basically getting this money over a period of 3 years, if I'm not mistaken. So then you have to implement these things. You can't have a setback again where we have to go for the 18th time to IMF. I don't think the country can sustain
Yes, because we have gone to the IMF 16 times before. This is the 17th time. It's true. But really, judging from the talk and the publishings out there appears to be only one party that does not want to have elections, and that's a little old party, old but little, with its one member, the United National Party. Apart from them, everybody is openly saying, well, let's have elections. That includes the Rajapaksa-dominated family party, the Potua. The JVP are calling for that, the SJB are calling for that, and God knows everybody else too. But, you know, so it's just one person's holding the proceedings up. Is that, how unacceptable is that? How undemocratic is that?
Yeah, that's what they are saying.
Yeah.
I don't know whether they are genuine. They're basically throwing it at, knowing that it will not happen. That could be another possibility. You say, oh, we are ready for elections anytime, but then they know it won't happen.
But now, on the basis of this elections, announcement from the Elections Commission and so on, aren't you a bit concerned that the same old will happen again? In the sense that, you know, it's quite often said that the people are to be blamed. But how can you blame the people when on this tray is, just like Harshana here, who's been kind enough to give us the water, it's cold water, and cold water. So we can drink cold water because that's what is on offer. You know, there isn't orange juice here, is there? Right? So like that, all these political parties put out the same old people whose integrity has been questioned, who've been convicted of something or other. Yesterday's murderers are today's legislators. Yesterday's corrupt are today's legislators. Yesterday's agents are today's legislators. So what chance? Aren't you concerned that if we have these elections, provincial, local even, that the same old will be put out on offer?
I'm very concerned. Not only me, I'm sure everybody is concerned that we will have the same set of people who have been robbing and doing all the malpractices being put forward. So that's where we as the community has to bring in a lot of changes. First of all, we need to have that public literacy of political literacy, financial literacy, economic literacy created, or people to understand the importance of voting, the vote itself. Otherwise, what will happen is they will, their frustrations will be manifested in terms of changing just a government. That's not what we want happening going forward. We want to make that change where people really understand the importance of vote and also understand that it is important for the country to bring this change. Otherwise, we will continue to have this situation where the people that are put forward by the party leaders are not worthy of being elected. So if the public understands that, they will use that vote much more carefully to select those, whatever the party these people are supposed to belong to, but select the people with integrity, competency, and who has the skill sets to serve for the people. So that change has to happen from the people. Otherwise, I don't think any of the political leaders will go about doing it.
You've in your writings, which we've all read, Ravi Abesurya, you've spoken about a way to bring about system change. And there are several points there, but one of them is, the first one you mention here, is that financial, economic and political literacy. Do you think that the people out there understand that that we actually are not better off than we were 5 months ago? For example, it's just one important point that some people say, oh well, we have a new president and things looking better. But they're not really, because we're not paying our loans back, we're not servicing them, and we're taking that little money and, you know, having a party, limited party. It's almost like that, you know, Never Gilunut Banchun. It's like that.
Well, Never Gilenakam Banchun. So
yes.
we are in that process.
Yes.
Actually, we are having that Banchun, but
yes.
the ship is sinking.
It's sinking.
So there is no doubt about that.
Right.
So unless we quickly, stem the leakages,
yeah.
we will sink. And that's the route we are going.
How can we demand a political culture with minimum standards?
So what are these minimum standards? I mentioned, I just tried to mention earlier, I would put it as accountability, which means number one is accountability, where MP should fully accountable for the electors and only serve in that role and cease other endeavors to get them free out of conflicts of interest, because you see lots of conflicts of interest in our parliament. The people should demand them to deliver and hold accountable for the policies and election manifestos they put forward before the election. Now we can see all these manifestos, they may have not even read. If you really read it, they have not delivered on any of those. What they said is not. So that basically is giving a false promises, which never gets done.
Yeah.
Then the second one is competency. Are the politicians act and maintain appropriate level of knowledge and skills and ability to ensure they provide the highest standards of service for their constitutions to successfully fulfill their role? We don't see that at all. And we need to have limits put in on their terms and age. There are some people are not really in the right condition to be in the parliament.
Indeed.
So there has to be limits put in where we have to see much more younger people coming forward, female representation as was mentioned in the local government announcement. And the third one is integrity, which you mentioned, should have never lied while they are in public office.
They ought to have no pending cases or pending investigations even. So that really, before they put out their nominations, they ought to get a police clearance certificate.
Absolutely. We got police clearance for other jobs, but not for parliamentary.
Exactly. I know that quite ordinary jobs, they will ask for a police
report, but not for this. So that's very, very important. They don't have a criminal record and a history of irregularities, which like bribery and corruption is the root cause for all this trouble. So if we don't have that checked, then we will not have proper people coming forward.
I think the most important fact that you've written about and called for is the need to have laws surrounding election financing. A lot of politicians, when asked about this, are almost flippant. They say, well, we welcome it. But really, do they? There is only a handful of politicians today in this country whose asset and liabilities declaration can be seen live online.
That's right.
But the others, you have to pay the Speaker's office pay him some money and get them, and you can just read it, but you're not even allowed to discuss it with your partner. That's true. You cannot discuss it, you cannot publish it. These rules need to change.
Absolutely. If we are to bring the system change, we need these standards, I call it minimum standards, for the political machinery to work, whether it is local governments, provincial or parliament. Every aspect has to change. How do you bring that change? It's easier said than done. That's where the issue is.
Let's go for a quick break and look at some of these other things, which is easier said than done. Tonight we're talking about Sri Lanka needs system change. And let's go for a break. We'll see you on the other side.
Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shauketaly.
Election Commission ready for local government election
and a petition filed with Supreme Court seeking to suspend local government election. Electricity engineers want Minister Kanchana Wijesekara removed. Is the government decision to import eggs another attempt to loot money? How did Kanchipani Imran flee to India days after securing bail? Vasanta writes to the masses from prison. Brazilians bid farewell to Pelé with 24-hour wake and coffin procession. Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shauketaly.
And welcome back to Newsline Live. I'm in conversation with Mr. Ravi Abesurya, the Advocacy Chair and Board Member of the CFA Society of Sri Lanka. The breaking news was that the National Election Commission this evening announced that the notice calling for nominations for 340 local government institutions will be released by the district secretaries tomorrow, Wednesday, the 4th. Ms. Abesurya, to go back, what really are the main other things that we need in this system change to ensure a better Sri Lanka for our children, for our grandchildren?
Absolutely imperative is the change of the election process. We have to expand the representative democracy in Sri Lanka. So to do that, we have to make sure all our expatriate community, particularly all the Sri Lankan citizens who are living abroad, which could be 2 to 3 million, are allowed to vote. How do we do that? Like other countries have done, we have to expand our postal voting system to every citizen who is living abroad. Not stop there. Also extend into their first generation children, their children who are also abroad, who are above 18, to also become Sri Lankan citizens at a very low cost. You attract them. They are the people who are earning a lot of money in Western countries like US, in Europe, UK, Australia. So they will be more than happy to support Sri Lanka or even come back to Sri Lanka if things can be turned around. So we need to get all that people coming forward. Then we also need to introduce something what Australia has done, like mandatory voting. Because if you have mandatory voting, we can have much better representation, a fair representation of people. Today people have just given up, which is very bad thing to do, but they have given up. There is disengagement and indifference. So that change has to happen. Australia has a small fine, just $20.
$20.
But still it carries some meaning.
Indeed.
That you have to be involved unless you have some very valid reason.
I think if you haven't voted, you should be last in the queue for a passport.
Exactly. Something very
Something
serious.
like that. Something like that.
Yeah. And also two more important things
yes.
is return to the single member constitutions.
Indeed.
Because now we have a district level.
Yeah.
So you don't represent your constituency very well. And another point is we have to have established ranked choice voting so that you have opportunity to select a ranking of the people who come forward. Long list that come forward.
Thank you very much for your questions. And as usual, it's the number to send us SMS or WhatsApp is 0772 300 305. And now then, I'm going to read one of these out, okay, today. All I have to say is this: he who dares cares. People, please, thank you. I'm asking you, this question is directed to you apparently. Please ask your guest why people like you don't come forward to contest elections.
Very good question. I have answered that previously at Face the Nation. Because we see the parliament as, I use the word cesspit, but it is so disgusting and smelling. That's the problem. We don't come forward.
The second part of the question says, if he doesn't want to do it because of such and such a reason, how can we ever get rid of this horrendous lot we have? There is no point sitting in a chair and saying do this and that if they cannot walk the talk. Now, read this out if you dare. but I have dared, and I do care.
That's right. So it's a very good point. We have realized our folly, our mistake of not coming forward for the last 75 years. We have to tell the truth. But hopefully we will come forward, going forward, if we have sufficient number of people coming forward of our own type of thinking, who is basically genuinely interested in the country to take the country forward rather than lining our pockets. So you can't be with a set of people who are primarily interested in lining pockets. You have to be with a set of people who are genuinely interested in taking the country forward. One person may not be able to easily bring this change, but a number of people who may hopefully get the opportunity going forward.
But it was like the Aragali, isn't it? The silent protests. They started with a few people standing in at junctions, and it just grew, and it grew, and it got louder and louder and louder, and it really, I suppose, was a moment that Sri Lanka should all be proud of.
Absolutely, yes.
But back to this question about, putting oneself forward, however bad the system is. Don't you think, Mr. Abesuri, that if you did it, your neighbor might think, well, Ravi's doing it, I'll follow. And then Aragali alike will have a whole lot of people swamping these political parties and saying, hey, hang on, we want to be considered.
Yeah, that's the change which we hopefully want to see, because if the masses also understand the importance, as I mentioned earlier, to bring different types of people to govern the country with different competencies and capabilities, we will be able to bring that change. So I am 100% in agreement with you.
When the masses meet politicians, and they should have the oomph to observe these politicians, and if they you look at them, and if they're looking at a watch that's pretty expensive, they ought to be saying to them, excuse me, before I give you my vote, can you just tell us how you got that watch?
Yeah.
Because I believe, I don't know, I might be wrong, but I believe, and maybe one of our retired SLS ladies or gentlemen might want to contact us and tell me, but I believe that in Sri Lanka, the culture is that if a politician gets a gift from wherever, he doesn't have to declare it. It becomes his to keep.
Yeah.
But when in Britain and so on, it's different. If you get it on a state visit, you must then declare it.
Not only declare, there are rules and regulations. The maximum value of a gift you can receive is limited. Maybe whatever, £100 or whatever, very low value. You can't get even an air ticket paid by somebody else.
Indeed.
Because that's considered as bribery. That is not there in Sri Lanka. So that's where we have to bring these checks and balances and minimum standards to ensure our people are kept within certain limits.
Now the local government elections are apparently, from what our breaking news tells us, is around the corner now. What advice would you give, Ravi Abisuriya, to the people out there who are going to be exercising their franchise at the local level? What should they be looking for? What should they be asking them?
Number one, as I mentioned earlier, is also the competency and integrity of the people. They have to be capable of doing the role they are being sent. Even in the local provincial council or the local authority. Number two is that integrity issue, because if they are any way connected to anything to do with the wrongdoings, anything to do with bribery or corruption, or we know that somebody recently took some 10 or 15 GI pipes. So that type of people are always going to steal and be up to a lot of corruption if you appoint them to these local government authorities. So we need to prevent them being appointed. So even if they are perceived to have been involved in anything, they should not get appointed to this, even if nominated by the political parties, because ultimately it is the voter who is appointing them. Even if so, we can send a very clear message: we don't like these people. Now today, unfortunately, there is another problem. People look forward to various favoritism or handouts from these people who are getting appointed. Yeah. So that's where things go wrong, because they expect, if I help this guy, he will help me once he gets appointed. Now that has to change. If they are appointing genuinely the right people with the right skill sets, integrity and reputation, that is what is important. Have they really done something in the previous situations? Not talking about the future. I will do this, I will do that. That is all about the future. But you can't go by only looking at what he promises, because we have learned a very hard lesson of false promises. We have to look at what the person has done before and make the judgment of whether he is the suitable person for me to send for my future and my children's future and my grandchildren. That's the key. That if we adopt that rather than hand out their offering just to say sahanayak, but that's not what you should look at. You should look at the longer term.
Shouldn't they change this whole business of give me a sahana?
Absolutely. It's not. We have been living with this sahana, and that's why we have had one after another elections which have failed to really deliver what people aspire. What is important is enabling environment for people to thrive in their own businesses, in what they are very good at. It is the environment that creates. Now today you can't do everything what you are capable of, because there are so many limitations of to bring back, import various items, do the business you are good at. There are very high interest rates, cost of living is so high, people are living in lorry roads out of this country. So there are so many restrictions, which is what we need to change. We need to change to make people able to do what they like. All these people who are migrating are not going to North Korea. They're all going to countries which has a liberal economic situation.
Indeed.
And here we are talking of, don't sell our national assets, whereas they are the ones that are basically eating out, and we have to increase taxes so much because of they are only serving the politicians and union leaders.
And not one of these politicians have been on this program or let us know even what their sacrifices are in these economically trying and challenging times. It's a sad fact, but officials and others have been here and they tell us and so on. There are people who can't afford to buy eggs, who can't afford to buy milk for their children, and those are the sacrifices of the common man. But to see our politicians still riding around in their gas-guzzling Prados, or whatever you want to call them, SUVs, it is tantamount to criminal. And they simply don't do anything optic-wise other than stick the middle finger up. That's what it is. It's sad, but it's true. And it's those very people who, don't you think, who need to be questioned by the voters before casting the vote.
Absolutely, yes, because they are the ones who promised us vistas of prosperity. But where is the vistas? Where is the prosperity now? So,
good question. As we come to the end of our program, Ravi Abisuri, thank you very much. We much appreciate your presence.
You're welcome.
And I wish you and your wife a wonderful New Year, as much as you can be wonderful about it.
Thank you.
But a kind, sharing one.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And that's the way it was on NEWSLINE Live this evening. Take care, have a great evening, and as always, God bless you all.